Welcome to the LeaderTreks Youth Ministry Trainingcast with Doug Franklin, where we help youth workers like yourself be intentional.
Hi, welcome to the LeaderTreks Youth Ministry Trainingcast. I'm Dan and this is Doug.
I'm Doug.
And today we are talking about one of my favorite subjects in the entire world, adult volunteers in youth ministry.
That's your favorite subject.
It is literally one of my favorite ones.
That's more favorite than your family, Legos.
No, it's my favorite subject in like the youth ministry realm.
Okay.
I do love my family very much, and I do love Legos a lot. But today we're talking about one of my favorite subjects in youth ministry, which is adult volunteers. Now, obviously, adult volunteers are huge in helping our ministries move forward. I volunteer in my youth ministry at my church. Doug, you started off as a youth ministry volunteer like 8 years ago, right?
Junior high, yep.
Okay,
Right with Fred and Barney and the Flintstones.
The Stone Age. It was slightly before the Iron Age, so yes, good. But we're both passionate about this. I love this. Growing up in the church, my parents were longtime youth ministry volunteers, and it hooked me. All right, the ability for an adult volunteer to have an impact in a student's life is huge. We, though, as leaders of our ministries, we have a responsibility to place them effectively in the ministry so that they can have the greatest impact, right? Like just having them come to you and saying, I want to serve, and you go, great, I'm just going to put you wherever I want you and it'll be fine, doesn't always work out great. And so today specifically, what we want to talk about is placing them in the best spot possible in the ministry to have the greatest impact. So I want to have a little back and forth, kind of get your perspective on this, Doug. What have you seen as far as placing adult volunteers in the ministry be the most effective for that?
I see there's two ways that people do it, two ways that youth workers do it. They either do it by their need or by the adult volunteer's passion. And I would say that 90% of us do it by need. So when an adult volunteer comes and says, hey, I'd like to volunteer in the youth ministry, one, we're super surprised that somebody would come to us, right?
Shocked.
So we get that person and we're like, awesome, you seem to be breathing. Okay, we have a need in junior high boys, and so you're there, right? That's how we do it. And what I see when we do it this way is that we make a huge mistake. Actually, a mistake that actually hurts our ministry long term. Because if we were to place by passion, we were actually able to discover what that person's passions were, what their interests were, what they wanted to do. We could actually place them in a role where they would stay not just for a year, but would stay for a season of a student's life. And you might say, okay, what's a season of a student's life? It could be junior high and high school. It could be all of high school. But when they're placed in the right place and they have the right passion for that place, they will do incredible things. And so the trick for us youth workers is to think beyond what our normal roles are. So we think, okay, we got the youth pastor, that's us, that's one role. And now we need adult volunteers. That's just two roles. Those are the only two roles that exist. I think we make a huge mistake when we do that. I think we could think about roles that are logistical roles, like we need help collecting payments or driving vans or flipping hamburgers or whatever. We could have those roles. Then we could have roles that actually were with students in relationship for transformation, and they could actually be working with students and helping students grow spiritually. Takes a unique adult to be able to do that. Not all adults will do that in all ministries. I think then having even some coaches, some people that are going to coach other adults in their ministry, that could be a big help. I think that there's actually ways that we could think of 4 or 5, 6 different roles that adults could have in our ministries, that when we place them in the right way, they're really effective. Now, what we have to do is we got to be disciplined to not go there, like to go to our greatest need, which is oftentimes having to be filled by us. So we have a super big need. We're filling it because at the end of the day, the buck stops with us, right? These adults come and volunteer, and our first thing is I'm going to place them in a place that's going to give me more time to focus on what I want to in the ministry. That's good, but it might not be great. And so we have to really think through, what does the adult want to do, and place them in a way that can make it really meaningful. I was working with a church a number of years ago that had multiple campuses. And a young couple came out of, I think it was Campus Crusade, and volunteered at the church. They had just moved to the area. The husband and wife had taken jobs teaching, and they moved to the area, and they wanted to volunteer in an urban setting in youth ministry. That's where their heart was.
Yeah.
And this was a church that had 5 or 6 campuses. They had a really big suburban campus, and on their suburban campus, they had a need for a young couple. And this need really was a huge. And so they took this couple and they put them there. It wasn't 6 months before they were gone.
Yeah.
And I wasn't surprised because they didn't listen.
Yeah.
They didn't really hear where their heart was and what they were passionate about, and they were gone really quickly. You might be experiencing this. Adults that only stay for maybe 1 year in your ministry and gone. The question may not be with them. The question may be with you. Have you placed them by passion? Because when you do, they'll stay a long time.
Yeah, and I think this is so important to realize because we have people show up who want to serve with students, right? But that doesn't mean they fit the exact same mold every single time. And so when we can identify those passions and those joys that they have within serving with students, it releases them to have a whole lot more impact.
That's really great.
I love and we talk about this all the time. I love the story that you have, that you've told me so many times of like the dads, right? That they found a very unique role for them in the ministry.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit?
I was working with a church, and they had they asked me to come and do an evaluation of the youth ministry. So I arrived at the church, and I was met at the front door right before youth group started by these 2 dads. And they didn't know who I was. They stopped me. They asked me a bunch of questions. I clarified for them who I was, why I were there. They called up to somebody on a walkie-talkie. They found out that I was supposed to be there. They let me in the door. And so I go in, and I go up into the youth room, and the youth pastor welcomes me, and we talk for a few minutes about what I was going to do that night. And then I said, "So what's up with the dads?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, you ran into the 2 dads." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, here's the deal. These 2 dads came in and volunteered in youth ministry to be small group leaders." And so I was talking to him, and I realized, really quickly, the youth pastor said, is that they didn't have a real passion for discipleship. So I asked them, "Guys, why are you here?" And they said, "Oh, we want to have impact. We want to be around our kids. We want to just..." And I said, "Guys, why are you really here?" And they said, "Our wives made us come. We're supposed to watch our kids and make sure that they have the right friends and all that kind of stuff." He said, "Okay, tell you what. I could use a couple of guys at the front door to high-five kids when they came in, to fist pump them, to tell them that you're excited that they're here. Why don't you do that? You can kind of keep an eye on the kids, on your children, and then 15 minutes after youth group starts, close the doors, lock it down, and you can go home." And the dads were like, "That would be awesome." And so that's what the dads did. And they loved it. And it became such a big deal that they had this high-five routine, and they had these handshakes, and they had all this stuff going on. And students look forward to meeting the 2 dads, and guess what? The 2 dads look forward to going home after 15 minutes. And so it was a big win for everybody, but what this youth worker had to do was figure out why they were really there, place them in a role that was perfect for them, allowed them to reach their goals, and also made a big win for the ministry. 2 guys at the front door welcoming everybody, making sure that the right people were coming in, really important.
Yeah, I love that story because, again, it talks about getting to the heart of why they're there and then finding a very specific role for them. When we place by passion, we're helping adults identify what they're passionate about in the church and specific roles within the ministry itself, but also finding areas for them to minister outside of the ministry as well. So like myself, I love doing things outdoors. So like I love to take students hiking and going canoeing. That's something that's not a regular program within the ministry, but I've identified it's something I love to do, and I can bring students along with me.
Yeah.
So we have this area of placing adults using passion, not necessarily our need. But there's also this other element of like, well, what students do you personally identify that you could minister to and minister with? And that's where we encounter this whole area of burden. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, actually what you're doing is you're getting into the sweet spot. So let me just talk about this tool for a minute, which is a really important tool that we've created for youth workers to use with adult volunteers. And this tool is actually 3 assessments. It's the first assessment is passion. What are you really passionate about? And those passions may be outside of the church, like you said, which are really interesting. You might be passionate about working on cars. And when you've got time and space to work with students on cars, it could be awesome, right?
Really cool ministry.
Yeah. And then there's burden. And I think burden really has to do with the kind of students that you want to interact with. And there's a great assessment in here on what kind of students that you're burdened for. Me, like my burden is to help kids grow in their relationship with Christ. Am I into evangelism? I think evangelism is really important, and I've got my tools down to be able to do evangelism, and I love to share Jesus Christ with people. Yeah. But what I get really jazzed about is running a small group. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so knowing that, you can actually place me in a better place. And then the third thing is impact. What kind of impact do you want to have? And this assessment's got a great tool inside of it where you get to walk through a set of seminars on mentoring and creative arts and logistics and small group leading and mentoring and all these things. Mm-hmm. And the adult volunteer actually goes through and says, okay, which seminar would I go to and why? Yep. And from that, you really begin to learn what it is, the impact that they want to have. And when you know their passion, their burden, and impact, you can place them in the right spot. And that's why we call it the sweet spot, so that you can actually place them in the right spot and they'll stay long term. And here's what else I think will happen, because this is what happened to me in my life. They volunteer, yep. They're put into the right place, they get some wins, they see kids growing in Christ, they see kids coming to know Christ, it all of a sudden captures their heart, and guess what they want to do? They want to move out of the marketplace and they want to be a youth worker, Yeah. And that's the way we're going to really grow youth ministry is setting people on fire to be involved in youth group, not looking at it like, gosh, they need some volunteers down there in the youth room, right. So I'll go down for my stint, yeah. That's not what we're looking for. Right. We're looking to set people on fire with the good news of Jesus Christ to the point where they say, I'm ready to go all in. I'm ready to jump in. And I think the sweet spot can help you with that. And I think that that's the way we don't just grow our church ministries, but we grow the Big C church in what we're doing across all kinds of different levels. So the sweet spot can be a great tool to help youth workers identify the passions of volunteers so that they're placed in the right spot and will stay long term and will have massive impact in our youth ministries.
Yeah. Adult volunteers have the power to transform students' lives, right? And to build into them and to help them grow in their relationships with Christ in huge ways. My parents have been volunteers for 25 years. I've been in the ministry now for 10 years, volunteering in the church ministry. Doug, you were a volunteer, became a youth pastor, started LeaderTreks. These are all things that have been birthed by helping people identify their passions and linking them to students. When we're able to have these types of conversations with adults and identify what they love to do and how they can connect those things with students, it's huge. And it can make them going from just being a volunteer to being a transformational youth worker. And that's our goal as leaders of the ministry, to replicate that in everybody around us.
And you can check out the Sweet Spot. It's in our store. It's a pretty inexpensive tool, and it's great to have on hand whenever you're either doing orientation with a new youth worker or sitting down and really showing value to an older youth worker that's been around. I think they'll really enjoy that. Check it out in our store.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.